The killing of Palestinian children by Israeli forces in the West Bank has become an ordinary occurrence as the regime escalates its violent aggression against the occupied territory. This, according to a new report released by the British newspaper The Guardian. The report said the situation across the West Bank has worsened since the ceasefire in Gaza started in January. According to the report, Israeli forces have killed 2 children per week in the West Bank since the beginning of 2025. It added that human rights activists fear the death toll will continue to rise as Israel applies tactics used in Gaza to the West Bank, including displacing tens of thousands of Palestinians and destroying infrastructure. The international child rights organization Defense for Children International says lack of accountability for Israeli troops has effectively given them a green light to commit further violations in the West Bank. According to an Israeli rights group, the likelihood of a regime soldier being prosecuted for killing a Palestinian is just 0.4%. Now, to talk about the Israeli crimes in the West Bank, let's cross over to Bristol, UK, where we have historian and investigative journalist Tony Gosling with us. Mr. Gosling, glad you can make it. Mr. Gosling, first of all, The Guardian, a Western media outlet, is admitting that the Israeli forces are killing children, 2 kids per week in the West Bank since 2025 or the ceasefire. And let's not forget, Mr. Gosling, during the war in Gaza, at least the report that I have is 17,400 children were killed, which is somewhere around 1 child every 30 minutes. That's in Gaza. Now, Mr. Gosling, in no place on earth this is acceptable, but somehow it is for Israel.
Well, they justify it to themselves because they have a extreme racist ideology, a hatred for the Palestinian indigenous people of the part of the world that they have invaded as settler colonialists over the last century or so. But before we talk about that, I'd just like to mention, I'm sure you've reported it too, $3 billion in arms for Israel, Donald Trump, who everyone is talking about his spat with Zelensky. But what about this extra $3 billion that he's signed off for the Israelis? He is complicit in this genocide. Whatever we may be relieved in Europe about his attitude in Ukraine, but his support for the Israelis is absolutely disgusting and unforgivable. The reason that we're seeing this increase in child deaths, and it's good to see The Guardian reporting it, and it's in fact I'm in some ways surprised, because the Israeli chief of staff from the army was meeting with the editor secretly, Kath Viner of The Guardian, during the genocide, and this has been revealed by Declassified UK, one of the investigative papers on the internet here in the UK. So The Guardian is schmoozing up to the Israeli forces, and they shouldn't be doing that. So it's good to see that they actually publish some information about how bad they are. That makes The Guardian and the editor complicit in this genocide, actually. By having such close relations that they're not supposed to do, journalists, with war criminals. But the IDF, the Israeli forces, their General Bluth, I think is Major General Bluth, and others, have increased the scope for Israeli soldiers to kill people without provocation. So what they call the IDF fire orders. And this is revealed by the Israeli paper Haaretz back in February. So they can shoot to kill civilians, and including anyone who is messing with the ground. In other words, if you're planting some seeds or you're tending to your garden, that's an excuse now, according to the Israeli Defense Force, to shoot and kill a Palestinian, as well as vehicles approaching checkpoints. They can also be shot, even if they're not speeding, as has happened several times now. So the Israeli Defense Forces are actually giving carte blanche to their soldiers in the West Bank mainly now to just simply kill civilians on these ridiculous precepts where there's really no excuse to do it. And so the reason for this is because they've managed to get away with the genocide in Gaza pretty much scot-free. In fact, they've got now extra land in South Lebanon and in Syria, so they are feeling very cock-a-hoop. Oh, we did okay there. So they're carrying on. They're doubling down on their war crimes, and it's particularly horrifying to see that those troops that were massacring in a racist fashion the Palestinians in Gaza are now doing the same sort of thing, even though there's a ceasefire in Gaza, just about, in the West Bank.
Like you said, it's the impunity that is one of the main big problems. Like the rights organization Defense for Children International also said, lack of accountability for Israeli troops has effectively given them a green light to commit further violations in the West Bank. So, Mr. Gosling, why is the regime enjoying this impunity? There are no red lines, as we've witnessed. And Mr. Gosling, it seems that they want to carry out, like you said as well, the same types of aggression in Gaza, in the West Bank as well.
Well, the children are being killed, I think, because this is a very demoralizing effect on the Palestinian people. And also, of course, they will grow up probably to be part of the movement against the Israelis. But really, this is the most evil regime ever. As far as I can see, I've never known of a regime which deliberately targets and kills children, deliberately targets and kills pregnant women. What they're doing, of course, is they're trying to find the most devious ways to reduce the population that they so dislike. And in the bigger picture, of course, Netanyahu, he sees himself as this kind of messianic figure that's got to bring about a massive crisis. His father, from a very early age, schooled him in the teachings of the Rabbi Maimonides from Cairo from the 12th century, who talked about a king who would bring about a situation which would bring in the Jewish Messiah. Now, we Christians, the Christian part of the world, believe, of course, that Jesus was the Messiah, but many Jews don't. And the idea is that they've been waiting and waiting for the Messiah for such a long time that the Zionist movement, the political Zionists, have decided, well, if God is not going to bring the Messiah, we will do it. And of course, this is typical of the attitude of many of these Zionists, is that they are now to believe that they have to do what actually they should be leaving God to do. So they're putting themselves in the role of God in biblical history, which of course is a horrendous crime. They're putting themselves above God in their Old Testament thinking. And also, of course, we've got big international figures like King Charles and others who have got feet in both the Zionist and the Muslim camps, who see themselves potentially in the future as great peacemakers in the region. So the idea, it seems to me, is to create this big fake religious war, and then for somebody to sort of ride over the horizon like King Charles to try and save the day. But, we've got to actually understand, I think, that everybody in the world, including the superpowers like the Chinese, have got to intervene, step in and protect the Palestinian people, and do it now.
Like you said, we haven't seen much from the Chinese yet. There you have it, Mr. Tony Gosling, historian and investigative journalist from Bristol, UK. Mr. Gosling, it's always our pleasure talking to you, sir.